MSNBC decided it would be a good idea to ask the advice of a bloodthirsty neocon war criminal about the issue of war. So John Bolton here was asked about Putin invading Ukraine. You're not going to be surprised to hear he doesn't think the U.S. is being tough enough.
Let's talk about deterrence. How do you deter Vladimir Putin? He seems absolutely determined to do what he is about to do because he's amassed this force. Do you see him backing down?
I don't at this point. Look, the president announced on Friday that his policy had failed. He said unequivocally the Russian decision to invade Ukraine had been made. That's an admission that deterrence has failed. And yet you can still hear today from your report that they count on holding back sanctions to maintain deterrence. If deterrence has failed, the answer is to come up with new steps, certainly to bring the guillotine down on all of the sanctions they've been contemplating and take additional steps if they want to stop any further military action. Their admission that they're engaged in gradual escalation of sanctions is a further admission of a disastrous failure of policy.
The U.S. will not send troops in to rescue Americans. There are several thousand Americans still in Ukraine, or others who may be on this kill list, this hit list that we have been reporting on, that Putin has of resistors, insurgents, others that he wants to arrest and, or eliminate. Do you think that U.S. forces should actually go in to defend Ukraine?
Well, I think it's probably too late for that now, but I would say this. The red line between being a treaty ally of the United States and not being one is significant. But the issue, as in all issues like this, is would a Russian invasion and takeover of Ukraine adversely affect American national security and that of its NATO allies? The answer to that's absolutely yes. Would people say if Russia invaded Finland, not a NATO ally, would they say, well, that doesn't have any influence on American security? You can have an influence, a negative influence on our security, even if you're not a NATO ally. And we did not act appropriately early. I think we should have had more American forces in Ukraine, not to fight the Russians, but to train with the Ukrainians and to show those Russian generals looking across the border and seeing American flags. I wonder what that means. Biden took that off the table, saying there would be no American forces involved, and he got nothing for it.
Just to go back to the Trump years, because you had difficulties there. Well, why not? Well, why not is because that's when Ukraine became so politicized as part of an impeachment.
That's exactly right.
And as part of decisions and conversations. There was one call in particular, the so-called perfect call that Trump had with, Zelensky, which, certainly telegraphed to the Kremlin that they could do what they wanted with Ukraine, that America would not stand up.
Well, I think Putin was undoubtedly waiting for a second Trump term, but he's getting effectively almost what he would have expected then. This is going to be a victory for Russia.
That was just glorious. So, in other words, Trump was too weak on Russia. Biden is being too weak on Russia. What exactly does John Bolton want? What do you want? What policy goals are you in favor of? What do you want? In the case of Trump, he didn't allow the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. He didn't allow that. There was a scandal about the U.S. arming neo-Nazi rebels in Ukraine. We were doing NATO exercises right on Russia's border. So he did the whole swath of hawkish neoconservative actions. He did all of them. What more did you want? You want more NATO exercises on Russia's border? You want U.S. troop exercises on Russia's border? You want the whole slate of sanctions up front? Is that what you want? And look, that's the thing. He's not. Be honest. Be upfront with what you want. So he's very clear. He says a gradual escalation of sanctions is wrong. It didn't work. That's what he's saying. Okay, but John, here's the problem with that. Let's say you unleashed all the sanctions under the sun. First of all, it's going to hurt Russian civilians, which is terrible and condemnable, and you should care just as much about Russian civilians as you care about American civilians and any other civilians around the world. But also, if you do those sanctions, and then Russia still invades, where do you go from there? We fired every sanction that we had in the cannon, and then Russia still did it. What do you do from there? John, what do you do? You know what the answer is. You know what the answer is. It's boots on the ground. It's warplanes in the air. It's literally World War III. This is why this guy is such a monumental moron, on top of being a bloodthirsty warmonger neocon hack. Because the answer is always more war. Remember, we were engaged in negotiations with North Korea, and John Bolton comes out and says, we're looking at doing the Libya model with North Korea. The Libya model? Libya is when Gaddafi gave up his weapons and then we toppled him anyway. So you're telling to Kim Jong-un as we're negotiating with him, don't trust us, don't make a deal. So he literally just doesn't want a deal. He doesn't want peace. He is anti-peace. Then when he's asked directly, should U.S. forces go in? He says, quote, it's too late for that, but we should have gone in not to fight the Russians, but to train the Ukrainians. And wouldn't it be great if there were American flags flying right next to Russia's border and the generals could see it? No, that would have been terrible. That would have been as big of an escalation as if there were Russian troops doing war games right on Mexico's border or Canada's border. We wouldn't look at that as like, they sure are being defensive. We would have been like, holy shit, we're about to be invaded. Holy shit. God, he's wrong about everything. And then also the idea, like, should U.S. forces go in? He says, it's too late for that. Well, wait a second. So was there a time when it wasn't too late for that? So there was a different time when you would have had U.S. boots on the ground all throughout Ukraine, all over Russia's border, and you think that is by definition not offensive? Look, guys, in no uncertain terms, I condemn Russia invading Ukraine. You don't invade sovereign countries. That is obvious. That is simple. That is straightforward. There's no boatload of rationalizations you could drag in order to defend that. I think anybody who's defending that is wrong-headed. They're just wrong. It is also the case, though, that Western leaders have, in part, gotten us to the place we are right now. Why? Because half of Vladimir Putin's concerns, according to himself, is NATO expansion, is Western aggression. He views it as Western aggression. So if the West just said, okay, Ukraine is not a NATO member state, and they never will be, well then, if Vladimir Putin continues to invade, and there's a 60 or 70% chance he would still invade, well then you get to turn around to the rest of the world and say, it wasn't about NATO, see? It was about the other stuff he complained about, namely the historical grievances against Ukraine, where he thinks Ukraine stabbed Russia in the back and Ukraine took advantage of Russia, and, you know, Ukraine is in debt to Russia and not paying back that debt, and we had a shared culture and you turned your back on us and went to the West. It's all the other reasons. But you would have been able to prove that if you acted in an open and honest and fair and diplomatic way, where you negotiated and acted in good faith and said, look, some of your concerns we're going to concede to. You don't have to concede to all of them. You don't have to concede to all of them. You know, the idea you can never arm any faction of Ukraine, even if, you know, you axe the Azov battalion and you just have the Ukrainian defense forces. I'm not conceding on that one. They're a sovereign nation. They have a right to defend themselves. But yeah, will we reel in the fucking war games on your border? And will we say Ukraine won't be part of NATO? Yeah. Because then, if you make a genuine effort towards peace, if he continues to not be peaceful, you get to say, wasn't us. Wasn't us. We conceded plenty. God, he's wrong about everything. The guy's wrong about everything. Every prediction he made about Iraq was dead wrong. Afghanistan, dead wrong. And here he is again with the same garbage. The same garbage. And it's hollow. Any sort of criticism of Russia from him is hollow as fuck. Because this is a guy who, under the Trump administration, Trump was like, yeah, we're gonna occupy part of Syria and jack their oil. And Bolton's right there like, that's the right thing to do. And then now you're going to complain about territorial sovereignty? Please. All these criticisms are legitimate, but the source matters. And here you have a rampant neocon imperialist war hawk, a bloodthirsty psychopath, and he's guilty of everything you would accuse Russia of and more. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.